Hey guys. Welcome to Deleted Scenes.
Hello.
We are your ministers of Turner Christian Church here. So I'll start with my name. My name is Jack.
I'm Rachel.
I'm Matt.
I'm Jack. It's funny how you did that. I don't know.
Yeah,
I like to tease this guy. So
he does.
I don't know if he gets enough teasing at home or not. If Casey really gives you a lot of.
Oh, she keeps me in my place.
She does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good job, Casey.
And soon your kids will be old enough to chime in.
Oh, they already give me sass. Both of them. You haven't lived till you've gotten sass from a 6-month-old.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the way James does that as he gets older, and just what he's able to get up on you and stuff,
We can. This is a fun way to start. So he was out in the backyard a month ago, and his diaper was super full and saggy. And he came up to me and said, "New diaper," and I said, "Okay," and I just took it off because we have a fenced-in backyard. It's like, "Go play, and we'll put on a diaper when you're done."
Yeah.
And he starts walking towards the house, and turns around and says, "New diaper." This is the hand signal for new diaper. It's like, "Oh, okay. I'm sorry." And I followed him in, and as we were going, I stopped and turned to Casey and told her the sass that he had just given me. And from the hallway, he yells, "Chop, chop, lollipop."
That boy knows what he wants.
Yeah. And we laughed, so now he does it all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
I'm quickly
Oh, dear.
becoming the car guy in his life. And
Yes.
so every time he walks into my office, he goes, "I want the big one. I
Yeah.
want the big one," to
big
the
one.
cars that are in my office. And I'm like, let's give you the small one that's less expensive.
Yeah.
Here, So, but yeah, maybe someday he'll get the big ones. I don't know. But
I'm still a little sus. Like he stops by my room. He looks at me. Like maybe he knows me, but he doesn't talk to me without prompting yet.
Yeah. He'll get there.
Yeah.
And then he'll never stop.
yeah.
It's okay. I look forward to it.
My favorite word, I don't know I guess maybe it's 2 words, when he says good morning to people right now.
Yeah.
Like this, how he's not pronouncing his R's incredibly correctly yet. It's like,
Good morning.
good morning. Good morning, Jack. Like, that's my favorite thing. So,
My favorite is pretty good.
yeah.
When you
pretty
ask
good.
him how he is, he always says, "Pretty good."
He's getting the idea that that Americans have of like you give the same answer no matter how you're feeling.
Yeah.
in life.
Yeah.
So,
He's
The
gonna
quest-
mask young.
yeah.
Well, the question, "How are you doing?" is not a real question. It's a ceremonial question.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So I don't want to actually know how you are. I just want to, functionally ask, and you're obligated to say something brief and positive, right?
He's got
That's
that
our
figured
social
out.
contract.
It is our social contract. What I want to hear James say is what you just said by the time he's 3.
Oh, yeah.
Just like
My parents like to remind me that I was 2 the first time I said, "Actually."
Well, we've spent about 4.5 minutes just talking about nonsense. Deleted
Did you just
scenes.
call my son nonsense?
that was low.
I mean, I don't know if I called your son nonsense. I
Just everything he does and says.
no.
We
I don't
spent
know.
4.5 minutes talking about delightful things
Yeah.
of
That's
God.
fair.
And then
But it's
we
not the
spend
purpose of
another
the
minute
show.
debating whether they're meaningless or delightful.
Yeah, it's not the point of the show. How about
True
that?
that.
That's true.
So,
It's true.
because deleted scenes is about talking about the most recent sermon
Yeah.
from the last Sunday,
Yeah.
which was from Pastor Matt.
Mhm.
It was about partnership
Yes.
from the letter called Philemon.
Yes.
And so we have some questions. Rachel and I both have some questions for Pastor Matt that we are going to ask him about this message. The cool thing about this show is that you can actually comment any questions that you have in the comment section on either Facebook or YouTube. We are monitoring both of those things. So if you have any questions, feel free to chime in, or maybe even any comments that you might have. Feel free to send those our way, and we will get them asked and talked about. So without
Cool.
further ado, let's get into some questions. How does that sound?
Alrighty.
All right. So, Rachel, do you want to start this time?
I'll do it.
Cool.
Thank you, Jack.
Let's go for it.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm braced.
So in your sermon, you talked about how sometimes we're a Philemon or an Onesimus, and sometimes we're a Paul in a particular situation of irreconcilement. Is that a word? If we are an irreconciled party, how do we get a Paul involved in an appropriate way?
That's a very good question, because I alluded to a couple of ways that this can be misused in the sermon. And there are a lot of ways that we can try to apply scriptural principles in the wrong way, and it's kind of hurtful or damaging. In this case, I would say it's very important to understand exactly what Paul was, and to only bring in a person as a Paul in the way that they actually count as a Paul, because Paul has a close connection with both people. So if you have a person who has a close connection with you and not the other person, they can't be that same role. They can be like your personal Paul and counsel you through it, but they're not going to be able to step in the middle and pull you together because they don't have the relationship. If you can identify the person, it has to be somebody who has a good relationship with both of you and also has the wisdom to be able to come from the middle, and not seem like they're just on one team going against the other. So it's really important to identify the right person. And I think that most of the time those situations probably aren't going to be as common. I think most often what we're going to have is people who can be our support system, who can give us wisdom and advice, pray us through a situation. And because even Paul, he doesn't actually sit down with them. Like he essentially gives Onesimus encouragement and tools in the form of a letter for that conversation that they're going to have without him. So I think that's most often what it's going to look like. And it's also really important, again, the part of the sermon that could probably most be abused or misused is the public part of it, how he brings in so many people, which Paul is an apostle. He's also been a pastor in Colossae, and he has a church family. Like he's in a unique position to be able to do that. When we bring people in haphazardly, that can be really, really damaging. Yeah. So it just has to be done only in the situation where the groundwork is already there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I do agree that the Apostle Paul is definitely a unique person in this whole situation and in history. At the same time, I did like what you said, that a level of vulnerability and less of the individual perspective when we're having struggles is important.
Yeah. And that's, I think vulnerability is a big part of it, because we have to another way you could do this wrong would be to expect the other person to be open without offering anything yourself. Yeah. And I think we have to come to it with a vulnerable posture, as opposed to coming and demanding vulnerability of another person. Yeah. And that's whenever we get into these situations and we take it as an entitlement, like you owe this to me because it's in the Bible, that gets really hard. We need to actually, that doesn't work very well. We need to come with the humility, with the vulnerability from our own side.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Sweet. So my first question that I have for you, Pastor Matt, comes from this idea that you're talking about how Paul took a very personal stake in the relationship of Onesimus and Philemon. So I just wanted to ask you, is there other examples throughout Scripture of maybe Paul or someone else taking that type of personal stake in other people's relationships? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's the easy answer, and then I did come up with at least one other example, because the easy answer is Jesus. In fact, if you look at I Love the Bible Project, they do illustrated diagrams of every book of the Bible, and in Philemon, in this section, they have Paul like holding hands with each person, and there's a cross behind him, because they're saying that he's emulating Jesus. And I think the most direct connection you can see there is in Ephesians chapter 2, when it says that Jesus died to reconcile the Jews and Gentiles into one body, and then reconcile them to God. So in Paul's theology and Paul's view of what Jesus is doing, like he does this with Philemon and Onesimus, because it's what Jesus did when he came here and died on the cross on our behalf. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that's the big one. And if it's Jesus, then that means it's salt like that. That means it is necessary. It's something that we need to emulate. The other example, the first one that actually came to mind as you asked that question, would be someone like Jonathan. Jonathan took a personal stake in his relationship between his best friend and his father. So when David and Saul were in conflict because Saul was going crazy, Jonathan put himself in the middle and took a risk, and it did not pay off. It didn't. They weren't ultimately reconciled, which happens, and it can't be controlled. Right? Like we can't control the relationship. But he actually goes to bat for David. when he knows that Saul is clearly in the wrong. Like Saul's just flat out wrong about David. And so he goes to him and he advocates for David, and Saul doesn't go for it. And so he has to tell David, hey, you need to leave. This isn't going to work out. And Saul is very angry with his son for that.
Sure.
So that was another example that came to mind.
Cool.
That's a really interesting example because it's quite a juxtaposition to Paul. We usually think of the reconcilers as people in authority, but Jonathan is the son going to his father.
Yeah. I guess it would have gone differently if it was the king trying to make reconciliation, because he would have had the power to just tell them, hey, get along. And that's kind of what David tries to do it with his sons. There's a whole horrendous story that happens in his family, and he tries to do that, and the authority thing doesn't work out because Absalom just bides his time and then murders his brother. Authority doesn't just coming down on authority doesn't necessarily work.
Yeah.
So going back to this idea where sometimes we're Philemon or Onesimus or Paul, what if we're not any of those three, but we're actually a bystander brother or sister? How do we get involved in ways that are appropriate and don't lead to problems in the church community?
Yeah, when you told me you were going to ask that question, it made me realize that I didn't acknowledge the fourth role in the story. When I told people you might be an Onesimus or Philemon or you might be a Paul, you also might be one of the people named in the letter that's in the church. And they seem to be enlisted. Like Paul doesn't necessarily give them a mission. He makes them aware of it, right? He just has the conversation in their view. And so it doesn't seem like they necessarily have the job to jump in, but to be aware, and certainly I would imagine to pray, to be in prayer over it, to be aware and open to opportunities that come up. He does not tell them all, hey, you need to jump in and have counseling sessions with them and make them do this and, and pray, have a laying on of hands ceremony or whatever, But as a church family, I think when we know about these things, if we react with the normal tools that we use, prayer and fellowship and just emotional support, I think that can make a big difference, because reconciliation is frequently a very long process. And our inclination is to try and fix it right now. And that's also a problematic thing that we do, because it often just requires us living through the conflict and just sticking around and being there as people heal. Sure. So I would say for a person in that position, think long and hard, and you're pray before you do anything. Like your first thing is to pray. I think it's not as common that you're actually going to need to intervene.
Is there also kind of this idea of whether or not you're equipped, especially in the role of Paul, whether or not you're equipped to be doing, kind of to be that mutual person into people's lives, to kind of, be partnering with them in reconciliation? Is there that kind of idea too? Yeah,
absolutely. Like you may know exactly what they need to do, but you may not be the person that they need to hear it from, or that they even can hear it from, and there are times, like when I came into a new ministry and I didn't have established relationships with people, and I still, I only have established relationships with people here going back 2.5 years. There is a degree to which I'm not the one to have those conversations. There have been times when I've called on elders to help me or to have those conversations, because they know the person, or at the very least to sit down with them and say, please explain to me this situation so that I know more.
Sure.
So yeah, there are times when you have to say, I'm not the one to do this, which is hard if you're a fix-it kind of person.
Yeah, definitely. Well, my next question here, don't forget you can comment any questions that you have for Pastor Matt in the comment section if you'd like to. But my next question comes from this point where reconciliation is not a personal matter. It is a kingdom matter. And so I wanted to ask you, how does reconciliation, or the lack thereof of reconciliation, affect the witness of the church?
I think it is one of the primary ways that we prove or disprove the truth of the gospel. I mean, Jesus says, they'll know you're my disciples if you love one another. And that's the test that he puts on it. And one of the biggest scandals to what we say about the gospel is the fracturing of the church. And just to talk for a minute about reconciliation within church bodies, the fact that the gospel is the most multicultural religion in the world. It is the biggest spread, and it's meant to be this message of unity, and yet it is by far the most divided religion in the world. There isn't even a close second. Like, you could add up probably all the other major religions and they wouldn't have as many denominations as Christianity does. And that's a scandal to what we actually say about Jesus. And I think it's an obstacle that stands in the way of our witness. When we talk to people, they don't necessarily believe us because it doesn't seem to be true. Now, I believe that can be overcome, but it has to be overcome by individually proving to people, like people nowadays will often come to us with an uphill battle where we have to fight against all the negative things they've been convinced about the church or they've seen about the church, and then establish legitimacy through that relationship, which again is why it's such a long process. And actually, so that's one of the reasons why the heritage that we are a part of was because they looked around and said, hey, we're so divided that it's harming our ability to spread the gospel. We need to start undoing all of this because we need to spread the gospel around the world. I think that also is really relevant, not just to the connections between the church, but to our, if you ever had a kid over to your house, as you're in your Christian family, and the way your family behaves with each other will either recommend to them the gospel or it will make them think you're no different, and the gospel makes no difference. So every level of our relationships, people are constantly watching, and if they see something different in a positive way, then that will hopefully attract them to it. But if we don't show that the gospel makes a difference, they won't believe that the gospel makes a difference.
Sure. Yeah.
I was just listening to everything that you've been saying about all this, and like a common thread, even though I don't think you've actually used this word, is humility. Like, humility to God, so that we're behaving in a way.
Careful what you say.
That we're behaving in an appropriate way. Humility to others, that we're willing to admit our mistakes, even when they've hurt us. Humility to people that might speak into the situation. And I'm going to take a detour rather than ask my last question. This story was running through my mind while you were talking of when I was 26, I had this incredible opportunity, although it was kind of a journey to get there, to go to Europe on an extended trip. And so it's like this epic year-long thing to prepare for this. And I ended up in Scotland. And then I went on a trip to northern Scotland, which was like this epic journey again. Like, it was quite a trek. And one of the goals of that trip was to talk to this older person in the faith and get some wisdom from them, right? So I've gone on this like crazy halfway around the world journey. And I come back home afterwards and I'm talking to my mom and I'm like, yeah, this wise man, this is what he said to me. She goes, Rachel, I have been telling you that all the time. But I wasn't having the humility to hear it from her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yep. I can totally relate with that. We've been smirking since you brought up humility, and it's nothing to do with you.
Glad to hear it.
It's because, Jack,
I'm preaching on humility on Sunday.
Yeah. Humility is kind of...
That's why I said be careful what you say. Don't go too far into this concept of humility. You might take everything from me.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of going to be the capstone of all of this. When we put it together, it's like humility is the hardest part, and it kind of puts it all together. Yeah. And then Jack said, hey, I'll talk about humility. Yeah. So
wow.
I enjoy talking about it. It's one of the things, kind of in my introduction, I kind of want to, it's one of the things that's easiest to talk about in the church because it's scripture has all sorts of things to say on it, right? Yep. And we know how we ought to be humble, but it's like the hardest thing to actually put into practice, especially for us in America. Like, it is so difficult for us to say, anyway, we'll get into that more on Sunday.
Are you using the Ben Franklin quote in your sermon?
I hadn't planned on it.
Okay, then I'm not stealing anything, and you can still use it. Ben Franklin went on this personal project of practicing all the virtues, and he said the hardest one was humility, because once you got it down, you couldn't tell anyone.
That's always the funniest dynamic with humility is if anyone is actually good at practicing humility, they'll never say they are, because then that would kind of defeat the whole purpose, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyway,
Hey, we actually have our first question on YouTube. We haven't gotten one on YouTube yet before. Heather asks, would you consider Paul an authoritative leader, even to the point of stating to Philemon, you owe me your life? And isn't it better to convince a person that something is better for them? You know, Heather, you're getting to a really interesting thing that I've been noticing in reading Philemon. People have this picture of Paul being a very authoritative, fiery, condemning of people who disagree with him kind of leader, who's just like a hammer against heretics and all this kind of stuff. And that seems to be our view of his personality. I think it's partly because often that's what we want him to be. That's not who he is. In the one glimpse we have of him actively being a pastor, that's not who he is. That's not how he does it.
Mhm.
And so I think, and actually in the letters to the Corinthians seem to have an issue with the fact that he's not authoritative. Like he's not impressive enough to them. He's too humble. He's too, weak in their minds. And the more and more I study Paul, the more I change my picture of the kind of guy he was. And I think that Paul probably more often than not spoke to people the way he spoke to Philemon, saying, I don't want to make you do this. I could, but I don't want to. I want you to do it freely. If for no other reason, then Paul knows he's not always going to be there. And there really isn't a replacement for the apostles. You can't replace the apostles with another generation of people who experience the resurrection. So he seems to want to train people. Mm-hmm. And I think Paul was a very compassionate leader who really cared about reconciliation. That's kind of the basis for the whole series.
Well, we also see in a lot of his letters, what most encourages him is when a church is doing things that he has kind of taught them about on their own, mm-hmm. And I just have that concept on my mind because of the church in Philippi, so I don't want to go too much into it, but he is very encouraged when someone or somebody does something just because of the gospel, and that's what they've been taught. And so I just get the image with Philemon, about this, about love, you should be able to just what mm-hmm. you should be doing. I don't have to tell you, right? Do it. So
well, think about this. I just realized this. Paul wrote the letters to the Thessalonians. He writes them a couple months after he was there, and he was only there for a month. That means that Paul planted a church by preaching the gospel for a month and then saying, okay, you guys got it from here. And then just sending them letters every once in a while. If he's a real domineering, you need to toe the line and you need to have the whole creed memorized and know exactly how the Trinity works and all this stuff. He would have to spend a lot more than a month there. But he's comfortable saying, all right, you guys, you know about Jesus, and the Jewish people here that became Christians, they know about the Old Testament. That's the tools you need. Go.
Yeah.
And that's just fascinating to me.
Yep. Yeah. Take it and go for it.
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of approaching here on about 25 minutes of being active here. So instead of kind of asking this last question, I just wanted to kind of reiterate this idea of humility, kind of wrapping a lot of things in one. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about this in my sermon, so this isn't like me spilling anything.
Okay.
I realized when I was rewatching your sermon from this last Sunday just how much these concepts that we've been going through in this Back Together series all kind of play into each other and are all kind of similar in a different way. Mm-hmm. Because you talk about with this idea of true biblical love is kind of seeking out someone else's benefit above yourself, right? And that's similar, I think, for some of the other concepts that we've talked about too. So it's kind of one of those things where it's I feel like we've kind of talked about this already, but hey, let's go into it again because it's relevant to this topic too, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm interested in seeing how that plays out.
Yeah, that's been my experience too, that I got far enough in the series, I realized I feel like I'm talking about the same topic every time, just from a slightly different angle or in a different situation. It's and I guess the word I would have to end up using would be love. If I had to pick one for the thing that's in the middle.
Sure.
But in every case, it's okay, we're talking about the same thing, but just what if this is happening?
Yeah.
And you get a different side and a different name for it. But it's all it's been hard sometimes to leave enough room for another sermon because I could just seamlessly go into that and cover it in one, but I should cover it in two. And it's interesting how often the words will overlap in the passages. And so like there are a couple times where I've looked at this and this passage could have been this sermon or this sermon because they are so interwoven.
Yeah. It's almost as if Paul has like one consistent theme
Yeah.
throughout all of his letters, and it's just going to different people with different struggles.
Yeah.
You know?
It's almost like that.
It's
It
almost
can't
like
be, but
that.
it's almost like that.
So we have kind of come to the end of deleted scenes here, but I want to do this. Okay. We had a conversation earlier about kind of, maybe encouraging some new watchers and encouraging people to return watching. And this idea was to maybe do some challenges or like ask some questions or things like that. Somewhat similar maybe to the hot wing eating thing that we did, that Matt and I did.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it, it's November 17th. It's got flames on the logo. You should check it out.
Yeah, so go check that out.
Pretty epic.
But if you have any suggestions as to what you'd like to see us maybe do, we'll take it into consideration. If it's something wild, then I don't know if we really want to exactly do that.
We
don't limit people's imagination.
Yeah. Suggest anything, but we promise nothing.
Yes, there you go. Yep. So if you have anything that you think you'd like to see the ministers of Turner Christian Church do in challenge format, or just to have some fun at the end of deleted scenes every once in a while, or like throughout the summer as we're kind of thinking about what we want to do for the summer, just throw some suggestions in there as you watch throughout the week, or whatever you might think of, or when you see us throughout the week. Because we want to make this a fun time too. We want to really provide a lot of insight and good information, but also we want to have fun, and we want people to be watching and enjoying what they're watching. So,
yeah, absolutely. We might make one other pitch. Our next sermon series is going to be a choose your own adventure kind of sermon series. We're going to let people, it's basically going to be, what does the Bible say about? And we've chosen the first few. As a team, we chose the first 4 topics. But from there, we're going to do this all summer, and we want to talk about the questions that you have. So start thinking about those. You can email them to us, or if you're at the church service, there will be a card you can fill out of questions that you would like to hear answered. We will either answer them in a whole sermon, or we're going to use our weekly broadcast to cover other topics that don't make the cut for the sermon series. So be thinking about that and send us any ideas that you have. We would love to answer your questions.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Just to give you a brief 30 seconds, if there's any other questions out there, I want to quiz you guys just really quickly on something that. So there are 2 races, sometimes 3, but mostly 2 races that happen every year on Memorial Day. Can you guys name what those 2 races are?
I only know the name of one race, the Daytona 500.
Nope.
And I feel like
incorrect. That's in February. So
already happened.
And the only other one I can think of that I know that we talked about one of them because it's not in America.
Oh, the French name that you said?
The one from Montenegro.
Okay.
It's the one in Iron Man 2.
So that's the funny part. It's changed this year because of COVID. That one has, but there's 2 races that are happening this year that always happen on Memorial Day.
So we're not including the Montenegro.
No,
okay.
Monaco
Grand
Prix. Yeah,
I got the first syllable right.
You did.
Wait, and they're in the U.S.
They are in the U.S.
Okay.
One of them is like one of the most famous
Could you give
races.
us a
Is
state?
it Indy 500?
Yes.
Yes, that's the only other one I knew.
IndyCar, Indy 500, Memorial Day.
All right.
And then the longest race of the NASCAR season happens on Sunday.
Is it what's a long, like 600?
Yeah.
600.
The Coca-Cola 600. So
I get half a point for
the
that?
Coke 600.
Okay.
So that happens. And, so those are the 2 races. And we have not gotten any questions in since then. So there you go. But I guess that would conclude deleted scenes then.
Yeah. All righty.
So, Pastor Matt, if you'd like to sign us off.
Yeah. Stay healthy, stay hopeful, and go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Bye.